You're somewhere in the middle of healing and you have no idea if you're doing it right. Some days you feel like you're making progress. Other days you feel like you're back at square one. You wonder if you'll ever feel normal again, if this pain will ever truly end, if you're broken beyond repair. But healing from emotional trauma isn't random chaos. It's a process with identifiable stages. Understanding where you're in this process helps you see that what feels like regression is often just the next necessary phase. What feels like you're going backwards is often you going deeper. Today, I'm walking you through the 7 stages of healing from emotional trauma, not as a rigid timeline you must follow perfectly, but as a map that helps you understand where you are and what comes next. Because knowing you're on a path, even when that path is difficult, makes the journey more bearable. Today, I'm walking you through the 7 stages of healing from emotional trauma, not as a rigid timeline you must follow perfectly, but as a map that helps you understand where you are and what comes next. Because knowing you're on a path, even when that path is difficult, makes the journey more bearable. The stages aren't about time passing. They're about developmental tasks that need completion. Some people move through early stages quickly, but spend years in later stages. Others get stuck in early stages for years before breaking through. There's no right pace. Understanding these stages removes the shame of "why aren't I healed yet?" You're not failing. You're in the stage you're in, doing the work that stage requires. Each stage has its purpose. Each one is necessary. Stage 1, safety and stabilization. Creating ground to stand on the first stage isn't processing the trauma. It's creating conditions where processing becomes possible. Your nervous system is dysregulated, your life might be chaotic, your basic functioning is compromised. Before you can heal, you need stability. This stage involves practical things: ending abusive relationships, establishing routines, securing housing and income, building a support network, learning basic nervous system regulation skills. It's unglamorous, but essential found work. Some people want to jump straight to processing trauma, but their life circumstances don't support it. They're still in crisis mode, still unsafe, still lacking basic resources. Trying to do deep trauma work without stability often re-traumatizes rather than heals. The nervous system principle is that processing requires a sense of safety. If your system is in constant survival mode, it can't access the brain regions needed for integration. You're stuck in reactive patterns because your system correctly perceives that now isn't the time for processing, it's time for surviving. This stage might take months or years depending on your circumstances. If you're escaping complex situations, building support from scratch, or dealing with ongoing threats, stabilization is a significant undertaking. That's okay. You're building the foundation everything else rests on. Signs you're ready to move beyond this stage. Your life has basic stability. You have some support. You can regulate your nervous system enough to function. You're not in active crisis. You don't have to be thriving, just stable enough to start deeper work. Stage 2, acknowledgement. Naming what happened this second stage is acknowledging that what happened was actually traumatic. This sounds simple, but it's often where people get stuck for years. You minimize, rationalize, or compare your trauma to others and decide yours wasn't that bad. Acknowledgement means saying out loud, "This was traumatic. This affected me significantly. This wasn't my fault. This was wrong." For many people, especially those with developmental trauma, this is revolutionary. They've spent years telling themselves it wasn't a big deal. Some people describe the relief and terror of finally naming their experience as trauma. Relief because it explained so much: why they struggled, why they couldn't just get over it, why normal things felt impossible. Terror because acknowledging trauma means accepting that something really wrong happened and that has implications. The psychological resistance to acknowledgement often comes from several sources: believing you have to have had it worse to deserve acknowledgement, fearing that naming trauma means being broken or protecting people who caused harm by minimizing their impact. Acknowledgement isn't about blame or victimhood. It's about accurate naming. You can't heal what you won't acknowledge. Minimization keeps you stuck because you're trying to heal while simultaneously insisting there's nothing to heal from. This stage might involve therapy, support groups, or conversations with trusted others where you tell your story and have it validated. Hearing, yes, that was traumatic, from someone who understands can unlock years of stuck healing. Stage 3, grief. Mourning what was lost. Once you acknowledge the trauma, grief follows. You're mourning multiple losses: loss of innocence, loss of trust, loss of time spent in survival mode, loss of the person you might have been without this trauma, loss of relationships that couldn't survive your healing. This stage can feel overwhelming because trauma rarely involves just one loss. It's a cascade. The abuse meant loss of safety, which meant loss of childhood, which meant loss of certain developmental experiences, which meant loss of who you might have become. You're grieving all of it. Some people try to skip grief through spiritual bypassing or toxic positivity. Everything happens for a reason. I'm stronger because of it. While these frames can eventually be helpful, using them to avoid grief keeps you stuck. You have to grieve what shouldn't have happened before you can integrate what did. The grief process isn't neat. You don't cry for a week and then you're done. You cycle through denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance repeatedly. Some days you're accepting, the next day you're back in rage. This is normal, not evidence you're failing. Cultural discomfort with grief means people will pressure you to move through it faster than humans actually process loss. They'll tell you to think positive, count blessings, move on. These responses come from their discomfort, not wisdom about healing. Real healing requires making space for grief, not rushing past it. Grief might take months or years depending on the magnitude of loss. Complex trauma often involves grieving not just specific events, but entire childhoods, entire periods of life lost to survival. This isn't weakness. This is the appropriate response to significant loss. Stage 4, rage. Feeling the fury you couldn't feel then. After grief often comes rage. Rage at what was done to you. Rage at people who didn't protect you. Rage at yourself for not knowing, not leaving, not fighting back. Rage at how unfair it is that you're doing the healing work for harm you didn't cause. This stage terrifies people, especially those socialized to be nice, accommodating, or conflict avoidant. They're afraid their rage will destroy them or others. They try to suppress it, which only makes it leak out sideways in passive aggression, depression, or self-harm. Some people describe accessing rage as the moment they finally felt powerful. For years, they'd felt only shame, fear, or sadness, collapsed states. Rage was the first expansion, the first feeling of this was wrong and I have every right to be furious about it. The function of rage in healing is that it establishes boundaries. Rage says that shouldn't have happened to me. I deserved better. This was a violation. It counters the internalized message that you deserve the harm or should just accept it. Healthy expression of rage doesn't mean harming others. It means finding outlets, screaming into pillows, hitting punching bags, writing letters you don't send, working with therapists trained in somatic release. You're discharging the physiological activation that's been trapped in your system. Some people get stuck in rage, using it as protection against vulnerability. Anger feels safer than sadness or fear. But chronic rage is exhausting. The goal isn't to stay angry forever. It's to feel and discharge the appropriate anger so you can move beyond it. Stage 5, integration. Making sense of the story. Integration is when you start weaving the trauma into your life narrative in ways that make sense. It's no longer the separate, toxic thing you carry. It becomes part of your story, a difficult chapter, but one that connects to the rest of your life coherently. This involves making meaning without making the trauma okay. You're not saying, "I'm glad it happened," or "everything happens for a reason." You're saying, "This terrible thing happened, and here's how I understand it in the context of my full life." Some people discover that integration happens gradually as they process different aspects. They integrate the factual events, then the emotional reality, then the impact on their beliefs, then the effect on relationships. Each integration deepens their sense of wholeness. The neurobiological process is memory reconsolidation. Traumatic memories are often fragmented, held in different brain regions without coherent narrative structure. Integration involves bringing these fragments together into cohesive story that the whole brain can access. This stage often involves narrative work. You might write your story, tell it to safe others, or work with narrative therapy approaches. The act of constructing coherent narrative from fragmented experience is itself healing. Integration doesn't mean the trauma doesn't hurt anymore. It means it hurts in proportion rather than overwhelming you. You can think about it without dissociating. You can talk about it without falling apart. It's become part of your history rather than your present. Stage 6, empowerment. Reclaiming your agency empowerment is when you shift from "this happened to me" to "this happened to me, and here's what I'm choosing now." You're no longer defined by what was done to you. You're actively choosing who you're becoming. This stage involves reclaiming parts of yourself that trauma suppressed. Maybe you were vibrant and had to become small for safety. Now you're choosing to be vibrant again. Maybe you were trusting and had to become guarded. Now you're choosing when to trust rather than defaulting to walls. Some people describe empowerment as finally feeling like the author of their own story rather than just a character in someone else's. They're making active choices based on their values rather than reactive choices based on fear. Empowerment includes developing the capacity to protect yourself in ways you couldn't before. You set boundaries. You recognize red flags. You remove yourself from harmful situations. You're not helpless. You have agency and you're learning to use it. This doesn't mean becoming invulnerable or never being affected by things. It means knowing that while you can't control everything that happens, you can control your responses. You have choices about how you relate to difficulty. The trap in this stage is overcompensating into rigid control or hyperindependence. Some people confuse empowerment with never needing anyone or never being vulnerable. Real empowerment includes the strength to be vulnerable, to ask for help, to admit uncertainty. If you're recognizing yourself somewhere in these 7 stages, still building safety and stabilization, finally acknowledging what happened, deep in grief, accessing rage, integrating your story, reclaiming agency, or finding purpose in your experience, please know that wherever you are is exactly where you need to be. Healing from emotional trauma isn't a linear progression you move through once. It's a spiral process you revisit repeatedly, each time from a different level of integration. BetterHelp provides access to therapists trained in trauma recovery who understand which stage you're in and what that stage requires. Early stages need stabilization support and nervous system regulation. Middle stages need space to process grief and rage safely. Later stages need help with integration and meaning-making. They can help you navigate each stage without rushing, recognize when you're ready for the next phase, and understand that revisiting earlier stages doesn't mean you've lost progress. It means you're processing the next layer. You deserve support that meets you where you are rather than where you should be. Healing has its own timeline and its own necessary stages. With professional guidance that understands trauma recovery as a process rather than a destination, you can move through these stages knowing each one serves your healing. The link is in the description. Stage 7, growth and service. Using your experience for meaning the final stage, which some people never reach, and that's okay, is when your healing experience becomes something you offer to others. Not as obligation, but as natural overflow. You've learned things through your suffering that might help others navigate theirs. This is post-traumatic growth. Not that the trauma was good, but that you've grown in ways that wouldn't have happened without going through it and doing the healing work. You've developed capacities, wisdom, and strength that now benefit not just you but others. Some people become therapists, write about their experiences, facilitate support groups, or simply show up differently for friends going through similar things. They're not performing forced gratitude for trauma. They're authentically using what they learned to create meaning and contribute. This stage isn't necessary for healing to be complete. You don't have to become a trauma educator or help others heal to have fully healed yourself. This stage is about those who feel called to transform their pain into purpose, but it's not required. The danger here is premature helping. Some people try to jump to this stage before completing earlier ones, using helping others as a way to avoid their own healing. They become wounded healers who re-traumatize themselves and potentially others through unprocessed material. Real service from this stage comes from overflow, not obligation. You've healed enough that you have capacity to hold space for others. You're not using helping as avoidance. You're genuinely able to be present with others' pain because you've been present with your own. The practice of moving through these stages requires patience with the nonlinear process. You'll spiral through stages multiple times, each time from a different level of integration. This isn't failure, it's how healing actually works. Don't rush yourself through stages. Each one has necessary work. Trying to skip to integration before fully grieving keeps fragments unprocessed. Trying to reach empowerment before feeling rage leaves anger suppressed where it causes damage. Get support specific to your stage. Early stages need stabilization support, practical help, crisis resources, basic regulation skills. Middle stages need processing support, therapy, groups, safe relationships. Later stages need integration support, meaning-making, identity reconstruction. Be compassionate with yourself about how long it takes. Complex trauma especially requires years, not months. Developmental trauma affects every aspect of functioning and requires corresponding depth of healing. This isn't your failure, it's the nature of deep wounds. Notice signs you're ready for the next stage. Stability becomes solid rather than fragile. Acknowledgement feels real rather than intellectual. Grief starts to feel complete rather than overwhelming. Rage has been felt and expressed rather than suppressed. Integration creates coherence. Empowerment feels genuine rather than performed. Remember that healing doesn't mean returning to who you were before. That person doesn't exist anymore. Healing means becoming someone new who has integrated the trauma into a fuller, wiser, more compassionate self. The 7 stages of healing from emotional trauma, safety and stabilization, acknowledgement, grief, rage, integration, empowerment, and growth are not a linear progression, but a spiral process you move through repeatedly. Each stage has essential work. Each one takes the time it takes. Rushing produces false healing that collapses under pressure. Real healing unfolds at its own pace. You're exactly where you need to be in your healing journey. Whether you're still building safety, finally acknowledging what happened, deep in grief, accessing rage, integrating your story, reclaiming agency, or finding purpose in your experience, it's all necessary. Be patient with yourself. Trust the process. You're healing in the way humans actually heal. Share your experiences in the comments below. You're not alone in this journey. Let us know what topics you'd like us to cover next, and remember that seeking connection is an act of courage.